everybody. I am imagining you're enjoying the weather. As you can tell, I didn't wear my jacket today because it's so beautiful outside. Now, where was I? Oh yes, we need the book. And I am positive I know where I left it this time. Do you see it? Well, I could have sworn I put it in my bag. No. That one sock again. I'm not quite sure where I left the other one. That's all that's in there. Let's see. I think maybe Isn't that just strange? Maybe if I dug a little deeper. No, I packed that in case it got chilly today. Oh, I think I see it. I see something. It's round. It's not round. It's rectangular. It's my other book I was reading. Where could it be? Where could I have put it? I'm a book. I have a woman of beautiful skin on the front. She has great fashion sense. Where could it be? Do you see it anywhere? It is. Well, why didn't you say so? It was right there the whole time. Now, if you don't mind, I'm going to pull you in close. Last time we read Laughing Gas. And today, we're not hanging with Uncle Andrew today. Not Uncle Andrew. I looked at the word Andrew. Today we're not going to talk about my uncle, Albert. Today we're going to look into chapter 4, and that's called Mrs. Locke's Andrew. Now come on in close, and we'll read the book together. All right. So we're going to read the 4th chapter. It's called Miss Locke's Andrew. Miss Locke lived next door. But before we go any further, I must tell you that what next door looked like. It was a very grand house, by far the grandest in Cherry Tree Lane. Even Admiral Boom had been known to envy Miss Locke her wonderful house, though his own had ship's funnels instead of chimneys and a flagstaff in the front yard. Over and over again, the inhabitants of the lane heard him say as he rolled past Miss Locke's mansion, "Blast my gizzard! What does she want with a house like that?" And the reason of Admiral Boom's jealousy was that Miss Locke had 2 gates. One was for Miss Locke's friends and relations, and the other was for the butcher and the baker and the milkman. Once the baker had made a mistake and came in through the gate, reserved for friends and relations, and Miss Locke was so angry that she said she would never have bread ever again. But in the end she had to forgive the baker, because he was the only one in the neighborhood who made those little flat rolls with the curly twists of crust at the top. She really never liked him much after that, however, and when he had come, he had pulled his hat far down over his eyes so Miss Locke might think he was somebody else, but she never did. Jane and Michael always knew when Miss Locke was in the garden or coming along the lane, because she wore so many brooches and necklaces and earrings that she jingled and jangled like a brass band, and whenever she met them she always said the same thing, "Good morning," or "Good afternoon," if it happened to be a luncheon, or "How are we today?" And Jane and Michael were never quite sure whether Miss Locke was asking how they were or how she and Andrew were. So she just replied, "Good afternoon," or, of course, "Good morning" if it was before lunch. All day long, no matter where the children were, they could hear Miss Locke's calling, in a very loud voice, things like, "Andrew, where are you?" Or, "Andrew, you mustn't go out without your overcoat on." Or, "Andrew, come to Mother." And if you didn't know, you would think that Andrew might be a little boy. Instead, Indeed, Jane thought that Miss Locke thought that Andrew was a little boy. But Andrew wasn't. You see, he was a dog, one of those small, silky, fluffy dogs that looked like a fur necklet, until they began to bark. But, of course, when they do that, you know that they're dogs. No fur necklet ever made a noise like that. Now, Andrew led such a luxurious life that you might have thought he was a Persian cat in disguise. He slept on a silk pillow in Miss Locke's room. He went by car to the hairdresser's twice a week to be shampooed. He had cream for every meal and sometimes oysters. And he possessed 4 overcoats with checks and stripes in different colors. Andrew's ordinary days were filled with the kind of things most people have only on their birthdays. And when Andrew himself had a birthday, he had 2 candles on his cake every year instead of only 1. The effect of all of this was to make Andrew very much disliked in the neighborhood. People used to laugh heartily when they saw Andrew sitting up at the back seat of Miss Locke's car on the way to the hairdresser's with the fur rug over his knees and his best coat on. And on the day when Miss Locke bought him 2 pairs of small leather boots so he could go out for a walk in the park on a wet or fine, everybody in the lane came down to their front gates to watch him go by and to smile secretly behind their hands. "Pooh," said Michael, as they were watching Andrew one day through the fence that separated number 17 from their door. "He looks like a nincompoop," said Michael. "How do you know?" said Jane, very interested. "I know because I heard Daddy call him one of those this morning," said Michael, and he laughed at Andrew very rudely. "He's not a nincompoop," said Mary Poppins, "and that is that." And Mary Poppins was right. Andrew wasn't a nincompoop, as you will soon very well see. You must not think he didn't respect Miss Locke. He did. He was very fond of her in a mild sort of way. He couldn't help having a very kindly feeling for somebody who had been so good to him ever since he was a little pup, even if she did kiss him rather too often. But there was no doubt about that. In this life, Andrew led bored him to distraction. He would have given half his fortune, if he had one, for a nice piece of raw red meat instead of a usual breast of chicken or scrambled eggs with asparagus. For in his secret, innermost heart, Andrew longed to be a common dog. He never passed his pedigree, which hung on the wall in Miss Locke's drawing-room, without a shudder of shame, and many a time he wished he'd never had a father, nor grandfather, nor great-grandfather, if Miss Locke was going to make such a fuss of it. It was his desire to be a common dog that made Andrew choose common dogs for his friends, and whenever he got the chance, he would run down to the front gate and sit there waiting for them, so that he could exchange a few common remarks. But Miss Locke, when she discovered him, would sure call out, Andrew, come in, my darling. Come away from those dreadful street rats." And of course Andrew would have to come in, or Miss Locke would shame him by coming out and bringing him in. And Andrew would blush and hurry up the steps so his friends could not hear her calling her precious little joy, her little lump of sugar, into the house. Andrew's most special friend was more than common. He was byword. He was half an Airedale and half retriever, and the worst half of both. Whenever there was a fight in the road, he would be sure to be in the thick of it. He was always getting into trouble with the postman or the policeman, and there was nothing he loved better than sniffing about the drains for garbage and tins. He was, in fact, the talk of the whole street, and more than one person had been heard to say thankfully they were glad he was not their dog. But Andrew loved him and was continually on the watch for him. Sometimes they only had to exchange a sniff in the park, but on luckier occasions, though they were very rare, they would have long talks at the gate. From his friend, Andrew heard all the town gossip, and you could see by the rude way in which other dogs laughed as he told it, that it wasn't very complimentary. Then suddenly Miss Locke's voice would be heard calling from the window, and all the dogs would get up, loll out his tongue at Miss Locke, wink at Andrew, and wander off waving his hindquarters as he went, just to show that he didn't care. Andrew, of course, was never allowed outside the gate, unless he went with Miss Locke for a walk in the park, or with one of the maids to have his toes manicured. Imagine then the surprise of Jane and Michael when they saw Andrew, all alone, carrying past them through the park, his ears back, his tail up, as though he was as if he were on the track of a tiger. Mary Poppins pulled the perambulator up with a jerk, in this case Andrew, in his wild fight, should upset it and the twins, and Jane and Michael screamed at him as he passed. "Hi, Andrew, where's your overcoat?" said Michael, trying to make a high, windy voice like Miss Locke's. "Andrew, you naughty little boy," said Jane, and her voice, because she was a girl, was much more like Miss Locke's. But Andrew just looked at them both hotly and barked sharply in the direction of Mary Poppins. "Yap, yap," said Andrew several times very quickly. "Let me see. I think it's the first on your right and the second on the left," said Mary Poppins. "Yap," said Andrew. No garden, only backyard, gates usually open." Andrew barked again. I'm not sure," said Mary Poppins, "but I should think so. Generally goes home at tea time." Andrew flung back his head and set off in a gallop. Jane and Michael's eyes were round as saucers with surprise. "What was he saying?" they demanded breathlessly, both together. "Just passing the time of day," said Mary Poppins, and shut her mouth tightly as though she had not intended more words to escape. John and Barbara gurgled from their perambulator. "He wasn't," said Michael. "He couldn't have been," said Jane. "Well, you know best, of course, as usual," said Mary Poppins. "He must have been asking you where somebody lived." "I'm sure he must," Michael began. "Well, if you know, why bother asking me?" said Mary Poppins, sniffing. "I'm no dictionary." "Oh, Michael," said Jane, "she'll never tell us if you talk like that. Mary Poppins, do say what Andrew was saying to you, please." "Ask him. He knows, Mr. Know-it-all," said Mary Poppins, nodding her head scornfully at Michael. "Oh, no, I don't. I promise I don't, Mary Poppins. Do tell." 3:30, tea time," said Mary Poppins, and she wheeled the perambulator around and shut her mouth tight again, as though it were a trap-door. She didn't say another word all the way home. Jane dropped behind Michael. "It's your fault," she said. "Now we're never going to know." "I don't care," said Michael, and he began to push his scooter very quickly. "I don't want to know." But he did want to know very badly indeed. And as it turned out, he and Jane and everyone else knew all about it before tea time. Just as they were about to cross the road to their own house, they heard loud cries coming from the next door. They saw a curious sight. Miss Locke's two maids were rushing wildly about the garden, looking under bushes, up into trees, as though people do when they have lost their valuable possessions. And there was Robertson, from number 17, busily wasting his time by poking at the gravel at Miss Locke's path with a broom, as though he expected to find the missing treasure under a pebble. Miss Locke herself was running about in the garden, waving her arms and calling, "Andrew! Andrew! Oh, he's lost! My darling boy is lost! We must send for the police! I must see the Prime Minister! Andrew's lost! Oh dear, oh dear!" "Oh, poor Mrs. Locke," said Jane, hurrying across the road. She could not help but feeling sorry, because Miss Locke looked so upset. But it was Michael who really confronted Miss Locke. Just as she was going to gate number 17, he looked down the lane, and there he saw. "Why, Miss Andrew, Miss Locke, see down there, just turning Admiral Boom's corner." Where? Show me," said Mrs. Locke breathlessly. She peered in the direction in which Michael was pointing, and there, sure enough, was Andrew, walking slowly and as casually as though nothing in the world seemed to matter, and beside him waltzed a huge dog that seemed to be half Airedale, half Retriever, and the worst half of both. "Oh, what a relief," said Miss Locke, sighing loudly. "What a load off my mind." Miss Mary Poppins and the children waited in the lane outside of Miss Locke's gate. Miss Lark herself and the two maids leant over the fence. Robertson, resting from his labours, propped himself up with his broom handle, and all of them watched in silence the return of Andrew. He and his friend marched slowly up to the group, whisking their tails jauntily and keeping their ears well cocked, and as you could tell by the look in Andrew's eye that whatever he meant business. "That dreadful dog," said Mrs. Locke, looking at Andrew's companion. "Shoo! Shoo!" she said. "Go home!" But the dog just sat down on the pavement and scratched his ear with his left leg and yawned. "Go away! Go home! Shoo, I say, shoo!" said Mrs. Locke, waving her arms angrily at the dog. "And you, Andrew," she went on, "come indoors this minute. Going out like that, all alone without your overcoat. I'm very displeased with you." Andrew barked lazily, but didn't move. "What do you mean, Andrew? Come in at once," said Mrs. Locke. Andrew barked again. "He says," put in Mary Poppins, "that he's not going to come in." Miss Locke turned angry and red and regarded her hotly. "How do you know what my dog says, may I ask? Of course he will come in." Andrew, however, merely shook his head and gave one or two growls. "He won't," said Mary Poppins, "not unless his friend can come in too." "Stuff and nonsense," said Miss Lark crossly. "That can't be what he says. And if I could have a great hulking mongrel like that inside my gate." Andrew yapped 3 or 4 more times. "He says he means it," said Mary Poppins, "and what's more, he'll go and live with his friend unless his friend's allowed to come in and live with him." "Oh, Andrew, you can't really, after all I've done for you and everything." Miss Lark was nearly weeping. Andrew barked and turned away. The other dog got up too. "Oh, he does mean it," cried Miss Lark. "I see he really means it. He is going away." She sobbed a moment into her handkerchief and blew her nose and said, "Very well then, Andrew, I give in. This common dog can stay, on condition, of course, that he sleeps in a coal cellar." Another yap from Andrew. "He insists, ma'am, that will not do. His friend must have a silk cushion just like his and sleep in your room too." "Otherwise he can go and sleep in a coal cellar with his friend," said Mary Poppins. "Andrew, how could you?" said Miss Lark. "I shall never consent to such a thing." Andrew looked as though he was preparing to depart, and so did the other dog. She wiped her streaming eyes and went on. "I should have never thought of it of you, Andrew, but I'll say no more, no matter what I think. And this, creature I shall call Waif or Stray or—" At that moment the other dog looked at Miss Locke very indignantly, and Andrew barked loudly. "They say you must call him Willoughby, and nothing else," said Mary Poppins. "Willoughby being his name." "Willoughby, what a name! Worse and worse," said Mrs. Locke. "What is he saying now?" For Andrew was barking again. "He says that if he comes back, you are never to make him wear overcoats or go to the hairdresser's again. That's his final word," said Mary Poppins. There was a pause. "Very well," said Miss Locke at last. "But I warn you, Andrew, if I catch your death of a cold, don't blame me." And with that she turned and walked hotly up the steps, sniffing away the last of her tears. Andrew cocked his head towards Willoughby as if to say, "Come on," and the two of them waltzed inside, side by side, slowly up the garden path, waving their tails like banners, and followed Miss Lark into the house. "He isn't a nincompoop after all, don't you see?" said Jane, as they went up the stairs to the nursery and tea. "No," agreed Michael. "But how do you think Mary Poppins knew?" "I don't know," said Jane, "and she'll never tell us, I'm sure of that." And sure they were, because I never did. All right, we are going to read the next chapter next time. It's called The Dancing Cow. Thanks for watching. See you later.